This 1859 plantation portrait appears serene until you notice what's hidden in the servant's grasp. Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood in the temperature-controlled archive of the Virginia Historical Society, her gaze locked on a daguerreotype that had arrived in an unmarked package 3 days prior. The image depicted the Ashford family of Richmond, Virginia, formally arranged on the steps of their plantation estate in 1859. Master Jonathan Ashford sat squarely in the center, his wife positioned beside him, their 3 children arranged carefully like porcelain figures. Behind them, almost lost in the composition, stood 5 enslaved house servants dressed in their formal uniforms. Sarah adjusted her magnifying glass, the late afternoon light filtering through the tall windows as she examined the picture. At first glance, it was a typical antebellum portrait, a proud display of wealth, status, and control. Yet something in the stance of one servant had unsettled her from the start. The woman stood slightly apart, her face turned just enough to seem deliberate. Leaning closer, Sarah's breath hitched. In the woman's right hand, half hidden in the folds of her dark dress, was something that should not have been there, a tightly folded piece of paper, gripped with intention. Her pulse quickened. In the hundreds of plantation photographs she had studied, Sarah had never once seen an enslaved person holding anything. Such images were always tightly staged, every element carefully arranged to project the illusion of harmony and order. She reached for her digital camera, snapping high-resolution photos of the daguerreotype, focusing on the servant's hand. The paper was unmistakable, too defined to be a shadow or flaw in the plate. "This changes everything," Sarah whispered into the stillness of the archive. The next morning, she dove into researching the Ashford family. Records revealed that Jonathan Ashford owned Riverside Manor, a tobacco plantation employing 47 enslaved laborers in 1859. He was well regarded in Richmond society, a city councilman, and regular at St. John's Episcopal Church. The daguerreotype had been taken by Marcus Webb, a traveling photographer who documented Virginia's wealthy families between 1855 and 1861. Webb's ledger, preserved at the Library of Virginia, confirmed the sitting date, the 14th of August, 1859. Sarah examined other Webb portraits, dozens of them. None showed enslaved people holding any object. Servants were always arranged like background ornaments, symbols of affluence rather than individuals. Returning to the original image, she used specialized enhancement software. Slowly, the object in the servant's hand came into focus. It was indeed folded paper, small enough to hide, but large enough to contain writing. She called Dr. Marcus Reynolds, a historian who specialized in resistance movements among the enslaved. He arrived within an hour, his lined face tightening with curiosity as he studied the image. "That's intentional," he murmured, adjusting his glasses. "She's holding that paper exactly where the camera would capture it, but not so anyone at the time would notice. She wanted this seen later." "Who was she?" Sarah asked quietly. Marcus opened his laptop and accessed Ashford plantation documents. The 1860 slave schedule listed 7 women working in the main house, no names, only ages and brief descriptions. The woman in the photograph appeared to be in her mid-30s, tall, with striking, intelligent eyes that seemed to stare directly through time itself. The following day, Sarah drove to Richmond. The August heat pressed down as she retraced the same ground trodden more than a century and a half earlier. Riverside Manor was gone, replaced by a highway interchange. But the Richmond Museum of the Confederacy preserved extensive Ashford family papers. An elderly archivist named Dorothy led Sarah into a small research room. "The Ashford collection doesn't get many requests," she said, gesturing to 3 archive boxes. "Mostly business correspondence and legal records." Sarah worked through plantation ledgers, supply orders, and personal letters. Jonathan Ashford's neat handwriting detailed crop yields and expenditures, listing enslaved workers as inventory, complete with appraised values. Then she found something different, a letter dated September 1859, only weeks after the photograph was taken. Jonathan had written to his brother in Charleston, "We've had troubling behavior among the house servants. Some have grown restless. I've increased supervision and limited their movements." Whatever ideas they've picked up must be stamped out before they spread. Sarah photographed the letter, her thoughts racing. What had occurred in that brief window of time? What had that portrait captured that Jonathan recognized only later? Digging deeper, she discovered a bill of sale from October 1859. Enslaved women sold to a buyer in New Orleans. The sale had been hurried and the prices slightly below market, suggesting desperation. Dorothy returned with a tray of tea. Finding anything of note? Maybe, Sarah replied carefully. Do you happen to know if any Ashford descendants still live in Richmond? There's Elizabeth Ashford Monroe, Dorothy said. She's in her 80s, lives in the Fan district. Her family donated those papers back in 1972. Elizabeth's narrow Victorian townhouse was painted a fading shade of pale yellow. She welcomed Sarah into a parlor crowded with antiques and framed photographs. Though she moved slowly at 83, her mind was sharp. My family's past isn't one I take pride in, Elizabeth said, settling into a velvet chair. But pretending it didn't happen helps no one. Sarah showed her the 1859 daguerreotype on her tablet. Elizabeth studied it through her reading glasses, her expression grave. I've never seen this before, she said softly. My grandfather Jonathan's grandson destroyed most of the old plantation photos. He believed the past was better forgotten. Do you know why? Sarah asked. There were family stories, Elizabeth replied. Whispers of an incident in 1859 that terrified Jonathan. My grandmother mentioned it once when I was little. She said the servants had been planning something dangerous, that he discovered just in time. What kind of plan? She never said. Only that there was a woman named Clara who worked in the house. Clara taught herself to read, secretly, by stealing books. When Jonathan found out, he sold her south along with 2 others. Sarah's pulse quickened. Clara. Do you remember anything else about her? Sarah asked gently. Elizabeth rose slowly, crossing the room to an antique secretary desk. From one of its drawers, she drew out a small, time-worn leather journal. This belonged to my great-great-grandmother, Margaret Ashford, Jonathan's wife, she said. She kept short daily notes. I've read them only once. They were unsettling. She opened to an entry marked August 1859. Jay commissioned the family portrait today. The photographer was efficient, though I noticed Clara standing oddly, holding herself with strange tension. Jay dismissed my concern. Elizabeth turned a few pages. Here, September 12th, 1859. Jay has sold Clara, Ruth, and Diane. He claims they were influenced by dangerous ideas from abolitionists and could endanger the household. I'm relieved, yet deeply troubled. Clara always served loyally. Sarah photographed the pages and later reached out to the National Underground Railroad Freedom Center in Cincinnati. She was soon on a call with Dr. James Washington, a leading historian of enslaved resistance networks in the Upper South. After reviewing the enhanced photograph, Sarah had emailed clearly showing the paper in Clara's hand. His voice carried an urgency she hadn't expected. Sarah, do you realize what you might be holding here? He said. Tell me, she replied. In 1859, Virginia was ready to explode. John Brown's raid on Harper's Ferry happened in October, just 2 months after this portrait. But the planning and communication for that and other uprisings began months earlier. Richmond was alive with secret activity. Free black citizens and sympathetic whites were spreading information and helping enslaved people escape. You think Clara was part of that? Look at the sequence, James said. The photo in August, the sudden incident in September, then the sale in October, right before the raid that terrified every slaveholder in Virginia. If Jonathan uncovered even a trace of Clara's involvement with an underground network, he would have acted immediately. Sarah's mind raced. Then the paper in her hand. Could it be a message? It's possible, James said. A map, a code, a name, a signal, any of those. Enslaved people used incredibly ingenious methods to hide and share information. Embedding it in something like a formal portrait, something no one would ever think to inspect, that's ingenious, he continued. Richmond had an active network. Household servants often acted as couriers. They had mobility and access that field workers didn't. There's even documentation of notes passed through laundry bundles and food baskets. How can I find out what was written on that paper? You probably can't, not directly, he said. But you might be able to trace Clara's path after she was sold. Records from the New Orleans slave markets sometimes survived. If she stayed involved in resistance work, her name could appear in abolitionist archives. Sarah quickly scribbled notes. Where should I begin? Start with the Amistad Research Center in New Orleans they hold, extensive Louisiana slave trade archives, and contact the Friends Historical Library in Philadelphia. The Quakers kept remarkably detailed Underground Railroad records. A week later, Sarah flew to New Orleans. The September humidity clung to her as she walked across the Tulane University campus, where the Amistad Research Center stood, a modern building preserving countless stories of bondage and liberation. Dr. Patricia Green, the center's director, welcomed her warmly. The fall of 1859 was a chaotic time in the New Orleans market, Patricia explained. After John Brown's raid, plantation owners across the Upper South panicked. Many sold trusted servants southward, fearing rebellion. She pulled up digital notary records on her computer. You said October 1859. Yes, 3 women from Richmond, Clara, Ruth, and Diane. Sold by Jonathan Ashford. Patricia's fingers moved swiftly across the keyboard. Here it is, the 28th of October, 1859. 3 women, ages 34, 28, and 41. Purchased by Jacques Beaumont, owner of a sugar plantation in St. James Parish. Sarah leaned in. Are there any personal details? Medical notes or physical descriptions? Patricia scrolled further. Yes, 1 woman, age 34, had scars on her hands consistent with burns. That's often coded language for punishment due to handling forbidden materials, books, letters, papers. Sarah's heart tightened. That could be Clara. Patricia hesitated. There's more. Her tone softened. 6 months later, April 1860, Beaumont filed a report with the St. James Parish Sheriff. One of the women from Virginia had escaped. The report describes her as intelligent, literate, and potentially dangerous. Sarah felt a chill. Did they ever find her? Patricia shook her head. No follow-up record. Either she disappeared successfully, or Beaumont decided not to pursue her. By 1860, owners were increasingly reluctant to advertise escapes it made. Them appear weak and inspired others. From New Orleans, Sarah continued to Philadelphia. At the Friends Historical Library, she met Thomas Miller, an expert in Quaker records and Underground Railroad history. He had already begun the research. I've been digging since your call, he said, guiding her into a quiet study room. The spring of 1860 was a pivotal moment. After John Brown's execution in December 59, abolitionists intensified their efforts. The Underground Railroad saw a surge of activity. Thomas spread several aged documents across the table: letters, journals, coded ledgers kept by Quaker conductors. There were 3 primary escape routes from Louisiana northward, he explained. The most reliable went through Texas, then up through Missouri into Iowa and Illinois. He pointed to a journal entry dated May 1860, written by a Quaker conductor named Rebecca Walsh. Received 3 travelers from the Gulf region, 2 men and 1 woman. The woman bore signs of hard labor, yet possessed striking intelligence and resolve. She carried knowledge of Virginia networks and spoke of unfinished business. Sarah's pulse raced. Could that woman have been Clara? It's very possible, Thomas said. Rebecca operated a station in southeastern Iowa then. Her term, travelers, referred to freedom seekers. And Gulf region meant Louisiana or Mississippi. He unfolded another letter, written by Rebecca to a fellow conductor in Philadelphia. The woman from Virginia has proven invaluable. She holds information on trusted allies in Richmond and deep familiarity with the routines of prominent households. She wishes to return south to aid others, though she knows the risk. Sarah stared at the faded handwriting, her throat tightening. Clara hadn't just escaped, she had kept fighting. Sarah photographed the fragile documents with care. Did she ever return to Virginia? She asked. Thomas leaned back, eyes thoughtful. There's no direct proof yet, he said. But some later correspondence from late 1860 and early 1861 mentions a woman working as a conductor in the Richmond area, someone with intimate knowledge of elite households and the ability to move freely without drawing. Suspicion. He opened another ledger, pointing to a faded line dated December 1860. C. Reports successful passage of 4 souls from the Ashford connections. Message delivered. Back in Virginia, Sarah met with Marcus Reynolds at the University of Richmond's Digital Humanities Lab. They had secured permission to use advanced imaging technology on the original daguerreotype, hoping to uncover new details hidden in the image, especially in the piece of paper Clara held. Lisa, the lab's technician, carefully placed the delicate photograph beneath a multispectral imaging camera. This setup was developed for analyzing old manuscripts, she explained. It can detect traces of ink, reveal texture differences, and expose details invisible to the naked eye. As the computer processed the image, spectral layers unfolded on the screen. Every crease of fabric, every subtle reflection, every shadow became sharply defined. "There," Marcus said suddenly, pointing. "Look at her hand." Lisa zoomed in on Clara's right hand. The paper wasn't merely folded, it bore faint markings, tiny indentations that hinted at writing. "Can you isolate that section?" Sarah asked. Lisa adjusted the filters, increasing contrast and highlighting surface textures. Slowly, astonishingly, faint lines emerged. Not distinct letters, but clear shapes, a rough sketch of a map with several marked points, and beneath them, a row of mysterious symbols. Marcus pulled out his phone and compared it to his research files. "These markings match known Underground Railroad code symbols," he said. "That star-like emblem here, it usually indicated a safe house or trusted contact." "She was holding a map," Sarah whispered, awestruck. In the middle of a staged family portrait, she hid a map. Lisa enhanced another area, revealing faint initials, JWMCRL. "Possibly her allies," Marcus murmured. "Initials of conductors or contacts in the network. This," he said, his voice thick with emotion, "is tangible proof of organized resistance." Clara wasn't just dreaming of escape, she was recording a system, preserving the path to freedom in plain sight. Over the next 2 weeks, Sarah pored over Richmond archives, church records, and abolitionist society documents, trying to trace those initials. Slowly, the names began to connect. James Washington, a free black carpenter; Mary Connor, a Quaker seamstress; Robert Lewis, an Irish immigrant who ran a boarding house near the river. All 3 were known figures in Richmond's free black and abolitionist circles, though historians had never been able to link them definitively. Clara's map changed that. It confirmed a coordinated underground railroad network operating within the city. The most shocking revelation came at the National Archives in Washington, D.C. Among Confederate intelligence papers, Sarah discovered a report filed in March 1861, just weeks before the Civil War began. Information received concerning an escaped slave named Clara, last sold from Ashford Plantation in Richmond. Subject is believed to have returned to Virginia and is aiding fugitives. Attempts to apprehend have failed. Subject demonstrates notable intelligence and extensive network connections. At the bottom of the page, the signature froze Sarah in place. Jonathan Ashford. Now serving as a Confederate provost marshal, his neat handwriting was unmistakable. "This woman continues to elude capture," he wrote bitterly. "Her actions threaten public order and must be suppressed." But Clara had not been silenced. In a Union Army report dated April 1865, just after Richmond fell, Sarah found a final note. Interviewed a woman named Clara, approximately 40 years of age, identifying herself as a conductor operating in Richmond during the war. Provided valuable intelligence on Confederate routes and Loyalist networks. Recommended for recognition. Sarah sat back, heart pounding. Clara had survived, and more than that, she had returned to the very city that once enslaved her, spending years helping others to freedom while the Confederacy hunted her. Weeks later, Sarah stood inside the Virginia Historical Society's exhibition gallery, where the 1,859 daguerreotype now hung behind protective glass with a new museum label. Beside her stood Elizabeth Ashford Monroe, Marcus Reynolds, and several descendants identified through genealogical research as likely connected to Clara's line. Among them was Robert Jackson, an elderly man whose great-great-grandmother had escaped Richmond in 1861 with the help of an unnamed woman conductor. Robert's voice broke as he stared at the photograph. "Clara," he said softly, "after all this time, we finally know who saved her." The exhibition label beneath the portrait read, "This 1,859 plantation photograph revealed more than intended." The woman at the right, identified as Clara, holds a folded paper containing a map of Underground Railroad contacts in Richmond. After being sold to Louisiana for suspected resistance activity, Clara escaped, returned to Virginia, and served as a conductor during the Civil War, helping dozens to freedom. Her deliberate inclusion of the map in this family portrait was an extraordinary act of defiance, embedding evidence of liberation within a symbol of oppression. Through collaboration with historians and descendants, Sarah ensured that Clara's name and legacy would be permanently honored. The symbols on the map were decoded and cross-referenced with Underground Railroad archives, revealing a far more intricate and widespread network than anyone had previously documented. Elizabeth turned to Sarah, her voice low but steady. "Thank you for giving her story its rightful place. My family's past is full of cruelty, but knowing Clara fought back and triumphed makes it possible to face." Sarah looked up at the portrait one final time. Clara's gaze seemed alive, fixed straight through the glass, unyielding, wise, and resolute. In her hand, barely noticeable unless you knew to look, she held the quiet proof that enslaved people had never been voiceless victims. They had fought, recorded, and outwitted those who tried to erase them. The photograph, once a symbol of antebellum power, had transformed into something entirely different, a testament to Clara's courage, a portrait of rebellion hidden forever in plain sight.